let's talk that hockey, because we don't get to talk enough hockey, and unfortunately, not the box score exactly the ideal news and the ideal headline that you want out of the NHL, but something we need to talk about in itself. And let's start there with Washington Capitals right winger Tom Wilson. Now, as we all remember, Monday night, Tom Wilson and the Capitals faced the New York Rangers. And in that game, Tom Wilson with a bunch of cheap shots, first on Pavel Buchnevich, and then afterwards on Artemi Panarin, which set him out for the rest of the season as a season-ending injury. A couple of days later on Wednesday night, the Rangers retaliated. Once the puck dropped in the first 5 to 10 seconds, there were fights all over the place. I believe it went over an hour's worth of fights between both teams. Tom Wilson himself was in a fight. And on Friday, he spoke in his first interview since that scrum earlier in the week that left Panarin injured and led him to a $5,000 fine. But the NHL did not suspend Tom Wilson. And as we know, he's had 5 previous suspensions in his career. And in that interview, Tom Wilson said that he reached out to Panarin to make sure that he's good and that he was good after sustaining an upper body injury. And now saying that, quote, I'm glad Panarin is doing well. He's better. I reached out to him, and that's really what matters right now, end quote. And Tom Wilson also said that he's ready to move on. So, Jimmy, I'll start with you when it comes to this situation between Wilson and the New York Rangers. Should Panarin, Buchnevich, and the Rangers forgive Wilson for those cheap shots earlier in the week?
No. And I think it's ridiculous when the Rangers come out with a team statement about this, saying that George Parros, who's the head of NHL player safety, is unfit to continue in his role. And they get fined 50 times what Tom Wilson got for ragdolling Artemi Panarin. And there was the other player with Buchnevich, which was an incredibly cheap shot. I mean, this is what Tom Wilson did to Artemi Panarin. We need to underscore the seriousness of this here. He could have killed him in that fight, right? Like, Artemi Panarin got hurt. He's out for the rest of the season, which is only a couple more games at this point. He could have killed him. That's one of the best players in the NHL. And I saw people were, defending Tom Wilson, like Greg Wyshynski of ESPN. Defending Tom Wilson at this point to me is a joke, but there's a guy I follow on Twitter who's really good, who I actually used to work with at FitzGSN, and he tweeted out, it was a really great point. He said, it's the NHL needs to be in the business of cultivating its stars, like what the NBA does such a great job of, the NFL, MLB maybe to a lesser extent. And you had a guy in Sidney Crosby who had his career forever altered by concussions. Thankfully, he's been able to play through a lot of that, and he's been on the ice. But you have a fleet of young stars in the NHL: Connor McDavid, Austin Matthews, Artemi Panarin, and just McKinnon in Colorado. And you need to be in the business of keeping them on the ice. Like, let's just be frank about that. Those guys being in the game and having the NHL be able to promote them and say, you can watch this on whatever network. I know the NHL just got a new rights deal, and we'll maybe get into that later. But you can't have this. You can't have a guy going out there and like, let's be real about it. He put several Rangers players in danger on Monday night. And I'm a guy who, I go to a hockey game, I love the physicality and the checking and all the stuff that comes with that. But at some point, you got to stop. And Tom Wilson crossed the line long ago. He ought to be out of the league as far as I'm concerned. But, man, this is ridiculous. I couldn't believe he did it again. And probably his worst infraction yet. And the NHL just, wipes a blind eye, gives him a slap on the wrist, and off he goes. Ridiculous.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack here, especially if you're a Ranger fan. There's just so much. First of all, that first period, just to get the numbers right, it was 100 minutes total of penalties in the opening period. And me being a novice, I guess, I figured it was like, is that the most ever in a period? And the answer is no. The first period of a 1981 game between the Boston Bruins and the Minnesota North Stars had 341 total penalty minutes in the first period. Took an hour and a half to play. I just thought
You were there, right?
Yes, I was there, clearly. But to my knowledge of what I was able to find, that was the most. But that's beside the point. What I find so weird about this, and there's a whole bunch of different things, and Jimmy just elaborated on the gravity of this issue. The fact that Tom Wilson feels he has the right to say, "I'm ready to move on."
Yeah.
Well, are you out of your mind? What if Andrew? What if I punched you in the face and then you fell to the ground and I was like, "Look, get over it. Why can't we just get along? Why can't we be friends?" That is exactly what Tom Wilson has done here, and the NHL went, that works for me. Let's penalize the other people. But it's also a matter of, I think, I agree with you, Jimmy. Also, I'm all about the physicality of hockey. It's an exciting sport, just by its very nature. But I think there's a lot of people who will watch players be in serious physical danger on the ice because of certain players like Tom Wilson, for one reason or another, and fans and analysts and all different types of people in the hockey universe will chalk it up to, well, that's hockey. You take that risk when you get out there on the ice. And I was like, that just sounds like an excuse for really aggressive people to get out there on the ice and take out their anger and be overtly physical and put human beings in danger. I think with a game like hockey, where we tend to think of it of, if you retire with all your teeth, you're not doing it right. I think when we think of a game like that, we tend to forget these are human beings out on the ice, and to have these players lose their humanity so that someone like Tom Wilson can just do whatever he wants, and the NHL just allows it to happen because they think it's going to bring in ratings, a guy like him being exciting, to put that in air quotes. It's incredibly concerning. It's a human rights issue, quite frankly, and it's an issue that hockey needs to address. And I'm sure you agree with us on this, Andrew.
Yeah, I was going to say, first of all, Dylan, that hypothetical situation that you brought up, that sounded a lot like I was Jeff McNeil and you were Francisco Lindor last night. So, I will say that first. No, secondly, I think this is a classic case of only one bully on the block. Hockey has changed where not every team has an enforcer. I mean, the Rangers don't have one there. I mean, when Panarin, your finesse guy, your goal scorer, one of your better offensive players, has to try and take on that role Monday night, that's not what you want if you're the Rangers, and it costs Panarin the rest of the season. So at this point, when you look at the landscape of hockey right now and in the NHL, Tom Wilson's really the last of a dying breed. In terms of, and I wouldn't even call him an enforcer, really, Jimmy. He's a goon. I mean, an enforcer does what he has to do to help neutralize or stabilize games that are getting out of control. A goon is just a guy who's out there bush leaguing it and doing whatever he wants and feeling like he's not going to get, nothing substantial is going to happen to him. And in this case, it didn't. A $5,000 fine, let me tell you, that's nothing. That's chicken feed. That's something that Tom Wilson can wipe his nose with allergy season right here in full effect. So not getting suspended. Now, if you're the NHL, you can't be shocked at what happened Wednesday night with the amount of fighting and the way the first period started. If you're not going to take it in your own hands to stop this and suspend and penalize guys like Tom Wilson for doing these type of actions, then you can't be surprised when these other teams take matters into their own hands and police themselves. And that's what I've always loved about hockey. They police themselves. If guys have something that, if there's a disagreement, discord, they will go to each other before the period starts and say, hey, I want to fight you. Are you ready? All right, I will see you on the ice. And that's something that I think is respectable. I know a lot of people don't like it. They think it's barbaric, but I think the National Hockey League has done about as good a job policing themselves and allowing fighting into the sport that you can without it being full-blown MMA or boxing. So I just think ultimately, for Tom Wilson, he's lucky that he's not playing back in the 70s or the 60s or the 80s, because I'm sure there would be teams night in and night out that would be ready and willing to light him up, Jimmy, and make sure he understands that these types of actions, these types of plays are not going to be tolerated in the NHL.
I feel like, though, even the worst enforcers, the nastiest guys, had some sort of ethics to them, right? Like I am reminded, and Andrew, I'll bring this up because I know you've seen The Wire, but what Omar would always say, like 1,000 times, a man's got to have a code.
Yep.
And that's what this is. I want to read you guys the greatest team statement ever, if I may. This got a couple people fired with the Rangers, John Davidson, Jeff Gordon, their front office, basically. James Dolan woke up on, I guess it was Wednesday morning, and remembered that he ran the Rangers. But this is the greatest statement I have ever seen. The New York Rangers are extremely disappointed the Capitals forward Tom Wilson was not suspended for his horrifying act of violence last night at Madison Square Garden. Wilson is a repeat offender with a long history of these types of acts, and we find it shocking that the NHL and their Department of Player Safety failed to take the appropriate action and suspend him indefinitely. Wilson's dangerous and reckless actions caused an injury to Artemi Panarin that will prevent him from playing again this season. We view this as a dereliction of duty by NHL head of player safety George Parros and believe he is unfit to continue in his current role. Guys, if I ever get fired from my job, I want to do it on a statement like that. That was terrific. Good on the Rangers. And that is how I think everybody feels about this current situation, at least here on this call. So good on the New York Rangers for that statement, even though a couple people had to fall on the sword for it.
Yeah, you know what, and from what I gathered, it seemed like that was mostly Dolan it was mostly Dolan's statement, and it was actually Gordon and Davidson who were trying to back away from it, and that's what led them to having to leave the organization. And that's a whole other conversation of whether that's a fireable offense to try and back out of a statement. But you know, here's the thing: we talk about fighting in hockey and with his place for it. My grandfather was a boxer. And he was not a particularly aggressive person. He was kind of a small guy, and that was from my dad's tellings of him, his way of being a tough guy, I guess. But you know, not only was there a code of ethics, but it's a craft. You know, the art of fighting, or the art of boxing, or whatever you want to say. There's a craft to it, and that's basically what hockey for a long period of time had brought to the fighting element of its game. And there's no problem with that. It's exciting. It's fun. We like seeing it. It reminds us of our ancient Roman roots, I guess one might say. But, you know, I think there needs to be a much stricter policy on where to allow, you know, fighting and physicality and aggressiveness and its difference between that and violence, because putting a player in danger is inexcusable, especially when this guy has a history, Tom Wilson, of doing so. So, you know, a lot of people thought that was a really, really long stretch to call for George Parros's job to be taken from him, but I don't think it was that far of a stretch, quite frankly.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say this. Tom Wilson said one thing that was right in his interview on Friday when he spoke about the whole situation. He said, nothing I say right now is going to change anybody's opinion. Absolutely correct. And it's warranted. Nobody should change their opinion on you from what you're saying. Even if you show remorse, you can apologize 1,000,000 times. The proof is in the pudding. And as Dylan mentioned, his reputation precedes himself. And this is what players around the league know him for, and that's what they'll continue to know him for as long as he laces up his skates and trots out there and acting the way he is. And now the Capitals and Wilson, they'll look to move forward as they go to the playoffs and trying to capture another Stanley Cup, while the New York Rangers are unfortunately eliminated and will look to regroup and recollect themselves for next season.